and I'll introduce our talk. All right, and I think I can slideshow these guys over here. Great, excellent. So today, for the Android Study Jam with Boston, I am going to take us into Lesson 6, App Architecture. And so a little bit about me, I'll introduce myself. I am Jennifer Bailey. I'm an Android enthusiast. I've been a professor at Ames Community College for 11 years, going on 12 now. I was so fortunate to become a writer and also an editor for raywinderlich.com. My Twitter and LinkedIn, I go by jen.codes. I'm trying to set up a blog. I've just now got it started, but that's my handle. So don't hesitate to connect with me. I'm a very social person, especially LinkedIn is the one I check the most. So don't hesitate to connect with me or chat with me. I use LinkedIn a lot. I'm very social that way. So speaking about Android app architecture, this is a very big topic. So as we get into this, you'll see there are many code labs. I would like to get us started with at least the first piece, which is Viewmodel, and we might have time to move into the second. So the Android app architecture is how you structure an app, because in Android, we have all these great tools, and you want to structure your apps so that you can be able to expand them and change out your data sources. And you want to design them well so that they don't become spaghetti code, essentially. I'm a programmer from the late 90s, and I was a Y2K coder, just like the Office Space guy. And I have transformed spaghetti code from old systems. We never, ever, ever want to do that again. So decisions have consequences. The app will be much harder to maintain long-term. When you have 6,000 lines of spaghetti code, it's horrible to maintain. You get duplicate code everywhere. For future maintenance, this will hurt your deadlines. So that's the reason we use a tool like architecture, because it takes more work initially, but over the lifetime of a project, it will save you time exponentially should you ever have to modify your project. And it'll also keep your code a lot more clean and easier to navigate. And the trade-off, it'll take longer in the beginning because you need to invest in learning these concepts and building your apps this way from the start. So here's some examples of short-term things that can be done that kind of violate Android app architecture. So you want to stay away from tailoring it to a specific device and things like not hard coding strings. This will also make your app easier to test. You can benefit from already solved problems. You could reuse code you've already written or some code similar, and it's going to save time. And technical debt is time and budget, so it's compounding. Recently, Google put out Android Jetpack libraries, and I'm a big fan of these. So all our architecture components are going to be inside of these Android X package libraries. So if you're being asked to import libraries, be sure and pick the one with the X on the end if it's some sort of an architecture component, because we want to use these and not the old compatibility libraries now. Using app architecture helps us implement in computer science a term that's known as separation of concerns. And that is where we want each piece of code individually wrapped. So we don't want a piece of code like a class doing more than one thing. So this will definitely help us support that very good design principle. So the best way to work with architecture, in my opinion, is to just hop right in. So I have a link here. I can also, whoops, I got to go back. Let me stop sharing for just a second. I'm going to follow that link that was in there. I'll place it in the chat as well. Backtracking through my slides a little bit. Okay, so to get to the code labs, you guys can go ahead and open that link if you like. If you have Android Studio installed, this will be great. If you haven't installed Android Studio, I would definitely welcome you to do that while I'm talking if you want. You're invited to follow along. If you get stuck irreparably, if there's time at the end, I'll help you individually. So if you get stuck really bad, don't hesitate to ask a question in the chat or ask a question as we go along. But I'll save some of the questions to the end if they're a long question. So I think that's the way we can kind of participate in this together. So I will open up the code lab, and then I'm going to re-share my screen. There we go. My second monitor over there. Great. So the very first architecture component we're going to cover is called Viewmodel. So a Viewmodel is going to help us maintain the app's state when it changes configuration. So there's a very good reason to use a Viewmodel right away, even in a simple app. And this code lab will show us how when we perform a configuration change, which means changing the device from portrait to landscape, without using Viewmodel, that state, the way that activity and fragment lifecycle works, it gets wiped away. I don't know if you've ever seen an app, one of my time apps that I love to use, one of my timer apps, I realized that when I flipped it to landscape mode, it erased all my timer counts. So by using Viewmodel, I can prevent that sort of thing from happening. So this is the app we're going to build. It's going to give us a word. It's kind of a two-player game that we're developing in this section. And so I would act out, like I could play some air guitar, and then I would ask my friend, what word am I charading? And if they got it right, I could say, got it. That will add to their score. Otherwise, we could skip that one and it will subtract from their score. So to get started, I'm going to download the starter code. The way the Google Code Labs are organized is they're all in one big repository. I usually use GitHub Desktop, and I'll copy that link and fork it. But for now, I'm just going to download it onto my machine and unzip it. And then I'll have to go to my downloads folder. And on the code lab itself, let's see, my web browser's all maximized. Let's see if I can get back to my Chrome. I need my mission control here. Oh, here we go. Sorry about the delay here, guys. I believe it's the charade starter project that we're doing here. So okay, so download the guess the word starter code. So in Android Studio, I'm going to launch my Android Studio. There it comes. I can open up the starter code, which was that starter project, in my downloads. And guess the word starter. Guess the word starter. So that's one of the hard parts, is there's a lot of projects in there. And I'll just hit open, and it's going to go ahead and load up all my nice code. And I'll just kind of leave both these windows open since I have a 15-inch screen that'll help me switch between them. So in this case, I have a markup extension. I'll ignore that. It takes a minute for the app to load there. So while it's loading, we can start doing a code walkthrough. So the files that they point us at, you can find your source files in the Java folder there. And main activity is very important. So this is the activity that launches when the app is first run. And then also we have our fragments in here. So the fragments are displayed on the main activity. And we have a fragment for the game, for the score, and for the title. And then we have our layouts. Layouts are in the res folder down here. So we have a layout for our main activity in each of our fragments. And I can look at these in design and code split view. And so I can also run this project. So let's run it, make sure it doesn't have errors. The updated projects were working for me right out of the box. One thing is when it prompts me to say update Android plugin, not right now. That'll update us to the most recent plugin, and it could require some code changes in order to work. So if you're doing a tutorial that's not very old and it's learning concepts that you want to learn, I would advise against updating the Gradle plugin because it'll bring you into a world of errors that may not be relevant to what you're trying to learn. So in this case, we'll just ignore that. And so I can play, guess the word. The word is home. We'll pretend I guessed that one right. I guess a couple words. And then if I get one wrong, it decreases my score. So if I get them right, it increases. If I get them wrong, it decreases. Pressing end game doesn't go anywhere. And spoiler alert, but if I rotate my app, it erased my score. So that erased my score. That's why we need to use the view model right off the bat. So this gives us an overview of the different files. The game fragment is the main fragment where most of the game's actions take place. We have a list of words. We have a reset function to reset the list of words, an on skip method for when I'm clicking that skip button, next word for when I'm clicking, or when I want the next word, excuse me, on correct for when they got it, and so forth. So all those files that they're talking about are the files in here. So we'll be working on those files in the next steps. And then there's also main navigation. That is navigating the fragments in and out of the activity. So they built the navigation in for us on this one, which is very helpful. And so we've run the starter code and we've played the game through a few words, and they talk about the issue is the starter app doesn't save and restore the state. If I look at the code, whoopsie, I meant the main activity code. Or usually in the on create, I'm looking for my on create view here. There's a state that we can save and maintain. But if I use view model, I don't even have to worry about that. And that's why we're going to use view model, because I don't have to save this state. To create view models, we need to use what's called a Viewmodel Factory. We could use the built-in or a custom one. We'll do one of each. And this will give us like a UI controller, or our UI controller is like our activity or fragment. Our view model is our data model. So I like diagrams better than words because we've got our view model. This has our data in it, and this feeds our data to the UI and back and forth. So that way we have our data separated from our UI. And also view models will survive in the memory when you do that configuration change, whereas the activity and fragment will be destroyed and recreated. And then if I look in my slides, there is a picture of the Android lifestyle that explains why that's happening. And there's also a picture in this tutorial. So I might just, or no, there's not. So I'm going to refer to my slide that has a picture of the Android lifecycle in it. Just one second. This is that's the lifetime of a view model. So this is the life cycle of a view model. The view model scope lasts the whole life cycle of instead of a fragment or an activity. So these get destroyed on configuration changes. The view model doesn't. So I really like that picture. All righty. So the very first thing to do, we found the problems in the starter app. Let's create the game view model. So the very first thing to do is I'm going to right click on my game package here. Folders within a project are called packages. You can have many sub packages. The packages keep our code clean. So right here in my game package, next to my fragment code, I'm going to add a Kotlin class or file, and I'm going to call this my game view model. And I'm going to second guess myself that I got that name right. Let's see. The view model. Game view model I did. So game view model is correct. I can just select class or file. If you select class, it puts a little bit of code in there for you. I'm going to be replacing that code. So I'm going to be replacing this with some code that does what's called inherit from the view model. This gives game view model an is relationship. So game view model is a child of view model. That means that it inherits all the things that view model can do. And what view model is good at is being a view model. So this has all the tools I need for game view model to be a view model. I have my auto imports turned off in my Android Studio. I like to know what I'm importing. If you have that, you can press Alt-Enter to import these libraries. It adds a line of code up top. So I do this with everything. You'll see me Alt-Entering throughout the tutorial. In the preferences, you can check a box to always have it automatically do that. I like to watch them be put in. That way, if I see a missing Android X on some of these or something, I can think, did I import the wrong file? If you do it automatically, it will ask you if there's ambiguity. But I just like control over that. So in step 2, we're going to override the onCleared. So onCleared is a method in our life cycle. Notice I've got some log statements in there too. So these log statements are going to show me when these events take place in the life cycle. And it takes place, this is like a constructor. So this will take place when the view model gets created, onCleared, when it's cleared. And I've got a log statement in each one. We'll see those printing when I run it. So lastly, I have to tell the fragment about this view model. I'm going to do that by putting in a variable at the class level here. So in my game fragment, I want to find onCreateView. And I can put this in a variety of places as long as I get it in my game fragment class. And so this declares an object of the class I just made, and I'm naming it view model. It's late in it because I haven't initialized it yet. I'm going to initialize it in onCreateView. So when the app is launching, or when that fragment is launching and it's creating the view, that's when I'm going to initialize that. And so to initialize it, let's see if this diagram is important. So we've got our view model. Yeah, so this just shows us the difference of what was happening versus what will happen. So now that I have a view model, the configuration change isn't going to recreate my fragment. And that means it won't erase my score. So to initialize it, I just need to add a bit of code into the onViewCreate here, or onCreateView. And I'll do that right after the binding object. And I'll import my libraries. And right here on line 59, this is initializing my view model object. I'm doing this by calling the constructor for view model provider, passing in this. This refers to this fragment. So this is giving it the context of the fragment, and it's getting an instance of the game view model class there. And I think it's funny that we still have .java on the end, but that's reminiscent of when we used to use Java. So this initializes my view model. Now I can use my view model in my fragment class. And I guess for now, we can go ahead and run it, and they're showing us the log messages that we should see. So if I want to use logcat, get my mouse over here. Not sure what I just did there. Okay, so I will open up my emulator. I'm going to go ahead and run this app. If I want to see my logcat messages, I need to select logcat, As my app is running, I want to make sure I have the correct device selected here. Sometimes we can have more than one emulator. Or for me, I can even have a USB device and then like a Wi-Fi device. So you want to make sure you have the right device. You also want to make sure that you're looking at the right app. So that's the right app. That's the most confusing thing that can happen with Logcat. You can also filter this. These are info messages that I'm using. So let's play the game a little bit, and I'll just skip some words, maybe build up a little bit of a score. Notice I already have one of my log messages when it said viewmodel provider.get. So that's when that fragment was created. It ran that log message in my view model. There we go. So in the init, that's where that came from. The game view model created or called view model provider get. That's over here when I initialized it. So that happened when I initialized it. If I change configuration, I should see some more print statements there. Called view model provider.get. So that shows that because I see this twice in here, that shows that it called the onCreate view twice in the fragment. But it only called the onCreate for the view model once. So that proves the concept that it did not create the view model when I performed the orientation change, but it did recreate the fragment. So that's proof of concept that what I did is going to be effective and it won't erase my score. And so they show us all these nice little things. And I don't see the message for destroyed. Maybe I have to stop the app or back out of it. But the destroyed happens. Oh, there it is. The destroyed happens when the fragment is destroyed. Great. So any questions up to this point? I'll look to the audience and just give you guys a second. Take a breath. And if not, then we'll just keep right on going. Okay, so to populate this game view model, what can we do here? I'm going to jump right to the code. So the purpose of this is I'm going to move a lot of the code that's in the fragment over into the view model. So what I'd like to move is all of these different pieces, the onSkip, onCorrect methods. So we'll do that first. I'll go to my fragment. I like to use Control F and find, whoops, if I type right, find onSkip. I want the actual method itself. So there is onSkip. I'm going to get some errors as I go through this too, so don't worry about those just yet. So onSkip, onCorrect, we'll grab that one too. I could have got them in one swoop. There's onCorrect. And then they say they're not private because we're going to need to call them from the fragment. So when I copy them, it'd be good if I took private out. If they're private, they'll be private to this class only. I won't be able to reference them outside of this view model class. Getting control of my computer again. And so now that I've moved the onSkip and onCorrect, I also need to move score and all those variables over. So I need to move word score, word list, and then also make sure that those are not private. So we'll do that very quickly. There, here's word score, word list. Cut those out, and I'm going to put them right at the top of my view model here. And I'm going to take the private modifier off. And notice how I'm already creating that separation of concerns because I've taken a lot of the code out of the UI piece and put it in the view model piece. And there's definitely going to be some errors at the moment, but that's okay. We'll work through it. So It shows us the files after the change. Hopefully I've got those right. And then in the game fragment, we already did that. So now in the game fragment itself, I can update the bodies of these functions. And I'll just update the functions themselves. That's in my fragment. Oh, I removed them. We'll just put them back in. On correct and on skip. And I'm going to make sure that's in the fragment. I want to make sure to keep them separate because some of the code is similar, so it's easy to get them mixed up. So great. In the game fragment, we also need to update the word text and the score text because we're not going to directly reference those anymore. We're going to reference them through the view model. So instead of looking at word directly, I'm going to look at view model word. Same thing with score. We'll look at view model dot score dot toString. There we go. Now we can build this app. I've got some errors in there so far. Let's see what my errors are all about. Let me see. What did we miss? Our word list got copied over. And how are you guys doing with this? Are there any questions on this? So is anyone doing this with me? And if you see what I've done, don't, shout out in the chat too, because this is an interactive process. So you guys can jump in if you like. So we moved, here's the code for the game view model class after refactoring. That's got all our list in there and everything. Here's for the game fragment class. One thing I love about Google Code Labs is if you get disgruntled, they provide the code, which is really helpful. And I just pasted that in the wrong one. Let me redo that. It'd be best to leave my imports on there. Oh, and then they erased my changes. So on second thought, thanks for bearing with me, guys. In just a second, once I get this all done, we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing here too. Another thing I love about code and Google Code Labs is that if we get it wrong, it's okay because you can go get the starter, you can go get the final, you can compare it, and by trial and error, you can really learn a lot. So don't be afraid to hammer on the code when you're learning. That's the best time to just really roll up your sleeves and try things. Great, so update references on the click handlers. We've got on skip, on correct. In the game fragment, update score and word to use the game view model. Let's see, we did this one. And we go to game fragment, update word text, update score text. This is just using our view model again. We did that one. Go to the next step. There, so I need next word. Whoops. I'm going to grab that method real quick. Okay, I think I'm at a place I can run it. Sorry about that, guys. But the purpose was served. So if we look at this code now, what I've done is I've moved a lot of the code out of the main or out of the fragment and into the view model. And if I did it right, our game should pretty much work as it did before. Let's test it. And it looks as though it's working how it did before. So that's our first taste of a view model. Any questions at that point? And if not, we will go ahead and add the click listener for our end game button. Oh, I hear someone's mic. Is someone going to ask a question?
What would be the best practice? Should we write logic? Should we keep logic in view model, or should we keep the logic in different fragment or somewhere else?
The business logic is for the controller generally. So at this stage, I think we're kind of missing the layer for that. So normally I think the view model is mostly just going to be a model, and you'll build towards that as you go through the architecture places. So what we've done is kind of we've separated the logic and the data from the UI, but they're both in the model. So then we'll introduce like live data and things later on in the code lab.
Okay.
Is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. That's okay.
And thank you for the question too. I love that. I encourage you guys to ask and jump in, and if I don't know the answer, we can try and figure it out too. So I might know resources. And I keep losing my browser, which is driving me a little bonkers. There we go. Oh, I figured out, I think, how to get to my other desktop. Let's see. Yeah, we'll just borrow this tab. Okay, so we were implementing the click listener there, and I don't want to enlarge my window all the way. Okay, there we go. So to implement the end game, let's put that in the fragment there. Get my Android Studio back. So in game fragment, let's implement this. And so in onCreateView, this little piece of code is going to call that method I just added. It's adding the click listener for that, and we do that in the onCreateView. And I'll do that after the binding, actually. Maybe with these other buttons right here. Okay, so that should call that method when that end game button is clicked. And then that method calls this method. And this method is going to make us a little toast and show us our score through the view model. And then it's going to navigate to the next activity. So we'll put that one in our view fragment here, or game fragment. Great. So it's really good news that it's still working the same. So that has, and then my end game. Not sure it's calling that one yet. Okay, on in game, run the app, click play the game, cycle through some words, tap the in game button. Notice that the app navigates to the score screen, but the final score is not displayed. So I may have something wrong in my code if it's not navigating to the fragment. Let me make sure I reran it. There, and we can kind of trace through the code to look for that error. I won't spend a lot of time here because we can look at the finished result. It's hard to talk and get your code right. And let's have a look. This is supposed to call end game. And so on end game is in my view model, or should be, or it's in the fragment. Oh, it doesn't have a body. So that solves that mystery. I need to call game finished in that method. That should fix it. And pop quiz, because my mind is drawing a blank. What is the quick key in Android Studio to jump into this method? Does anybody know? There's a quick key that you can just Command I or Command L.
Command B, or you can press and hold Control and you can click on it.
Excellent. Or Control click. Very good. Or Command V. So if I could throw a prize, I would. So very good. I love that's one thing. If you're new in Android Studio, you get a lot of methods and a lot of files. So it's worth investing in learning some quick keys. So you can Control click or Command B. And that takes me to where that method's called. You can find usages. You can go back to where the method is at. So that is very helpful when doing architecture in particular, because as you can see, I'm already adding more files. Before you're through all the code labs in architecture, you will add a whole bunch of files. And architecture apps, they tend to get a lot of files in them. That's just the nature of how they work. So I don't think I pushed my button. I'm still curious if it's working. I'll play my game one more time, push my button. That's better. So now when I push my button, it goes to the you scored, and there's nothing on there yet. The code lab was instructing us that that's normal. So we'll minimize Android Studio. Now I just found all my extra web browsers, and we'll go to that's not the last step. We still have one more. We still have to make a custom Viewmodel Factory. So, and implement it. We did the end game thing. So now let's create our own custom Viewmodel Factory. So we use the built-in Viewmodel Factory to create the one for the score. That's great. Sometimes you want a custom Viewmodel Factory. So let's create a custom one. I'll pull up my Android Studio, and it's going to be called Score Viewmodel and Score Viewmodel Factory. So over here in my score package, I'll add, whoops, got a little click happy there. Again, right click, new Kotlin file, Score Viewmodel. And I'm going to put some code in there. While it's in my memory bank, I'm going to add Score Viewmodel Factory. And now we'll go to the code lab and we'll talk about which each one of these are. So the view model is just like I had before. We've got an init method. It's got our score. That's going to show us our final score. And that's going to be my view model. Notice this is inheriting from view model again, so that means it is a view model. And we'll import my log. So this is just a basic view model. It's holding on to the score so that I'll be able to display it when I display my final score. The next piece is that factory. So let's work on that. So Viewmodel Factory is a piece of code that can create view models, and you can customize this if the default doesn't have everything you need. And it is inheriting from Viewmodel Provider. When I inherit from a class like this, it's going to require that I implement certain methods. So there's a quick key. I usually just float my mouse over it. You can say implement members. This will list the methods that you're required to implement from that interface or class. And then it puts it in there and gives you a place to put your code. And the code lab gives us this whole method. I'm going to replace it in case they may have renamed their parameter names, which is fine to do. So the parameter names are not part of the template, only the name of the function and the types. And we can paste that in there. And this will launch when the view model is created. So the create method in the view model is like the onCreate view. It's going to create when we create a view model, which we'll have to do in our score fragment. So in our score fragment, we need to create both a view model and a view model factory. And we're going to end up using the view model factory to initialize the view model. So we need them both, and we'll declare them as late init variables up top right there. And then to initialize those, first we need the factory, because we'll use the factory to initialize the view model itself. So I'm going to grab the factory, and I think onCreate view is the right place after the binding. And we can't do much before the binding because the binding has references to all of our items that we need. So in my score fragment, after the binding, I'm initializing my factory, and it's creating it from the bundle, require arguments, and it's got score there. So now I've got my view model factory. From there, I can use that factory to create my view model itself. And now my fragment will have its very own view model so that it doesn't have to keep all the data in the UI code. So that uses my factory, and it creates it using the score view model class that I just made in that step. So the score view model class is right there. And there's nothing much to it other than the score variable right now. And there will be more soon. So let's see, on create view, next we need to bind the view model score to the score text there, or we'll put the scores value. And that's going to be an on create view again after I create my view model in score fragment, like so. And so that's going to take the score from the view model and populate my score text on that fragment with it. Now if I run my app, we can cross our fingers. With any luck, it's going to show me when it creates my score view model, and hopefully show me my score. So let's run the app and see if I had any good luck with that. And so I'm initializing some score. Where's my log cat? Then we'll go to end game. Yay, it shows my final score. So it worked. And so now it's storing the score in the view model. Now here's the really big test. If I do a configuration change, it doesn't erase it. So I found apps in the store that are sometimes a bit, they will reset on configuration change. So you can use Viewmodel to help that. Great, and I love to see the journal dev link in there. So thank you for design patterns and stuff like for that link. That's wonderful. I love if you guys share. And I think that we might be at the end of the first code lab here. So not bad. Now, if you had trouble doing that, you can download the final code. So sometimes when I'm building these, if I get stuck, I'll download them both and put them side by side. And final code is wonderful. I got it to work, so I'm pretty happy with that. what I'd like to do is like look over the summary. So the app architecture guidelines, I have this link on my slides too. So separating classes that have different responsibilities. I really like how the audience pointed out, I forgot your name, I'm sorry, but I love how you pointed out that I've got some business logic as well. So I didn't separate all my concerns, but I separated my UI concern a little better. And then UI controller should only contain logic that handles the UI system interactions, and they shouldn't have to be holding things like score and lists of words. The Viewmodel class manages UI related data, so that can have the score and that sort of thing. And it's it's our very simplest Android architecture components. The reason I really like that they put this one first, because even just a basic tip calculator app could have that configuration change. There's so many apps in the store that don't have their state saved. So, and I wouldn't say a lot, but it's not an uncommon mistake to find. So even if you're just building your very first apps, you can benefit from Viewmodel, even if they're very simple. I love how they give us all sorts of links. And then I had my own slides. I'm going to grab those. And we can take a look at those real quick too. I put some summary thoughts. Great. So we can look through the Viewmodel slides. And now that we've seen the code, see if any of this makes sense. So we should have to put this in our build.gradle. I must have done that step first. So usually you put that in your build.gradle and then you sync it. So the Viewmodel prepares data for the UI, must not reference activity, fragment, or views in hierarchy. So that's something important to mention. I shouldn't have my activity or fragment views in my, or my Viewmodel shouldn't be referencing those. It's scope 2 life cycle, so that's just automatically built in. Enables data to survive configuration changes, which I really drove home, I'm sure. And it will survive as long as the scope is alive. We've got our picture. There's the class that I'm inheriting from. It's got its init method, which is the Kotlin version of the constructor. It's got the onCleared method there and a coroutine scope. So coroutines are another animal. So any questions on the first code lab? And then I would, oh yay, I do see a question from Harsh about factory design. Okay, good. So great. And I love that there's a link. So thanks for that. Any other questions on that one? And how are you guys feeling? Would you like to tackle another?
Can I ask you a question about the Viewmodel Factory?
Sure, go right ahead.
So I noticed that, I know that Viewmodel Factory, you can create a Viewmodel just from that. I was wondering, when do you create your own Viewmodel Factory and when do you use one default?
Okay, that is a good question. So the default one would be when we need a tool that the default one doesn't have. So I wonder if the Code Lab had that written out for us. That would be great. I think what it had was score. So use a Viewmodel Factory. Let's see, when the factory method pattern, creational design pattern, with a parameterized constructor. So we created a Viewmodel with a parameterized constructor to instantiate it. So I believe the reason we needed the factory was because we needed to be able to pass in a value. And maybe that link that was posted has some more information about when that would be. And I'll also do just a really fast search and see if I can find something. When is a Viewmodel Factory needed in Android? Yeah, I would say when you would create a custom one is when the default one doesn't work. So in our case, I think the default one won't work for score. And so I can't think of other use cases right off the top of my head, but that is a good example. And I'll, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, didn't interrupt.
No.
I have just one more question about Viewmodel. I know, so you mentioned that the configuration still stays when you rotate and things like that. So does that Viewmodel, if you keep getting that Viewmodel from your factory, will it always be the same no matter what activity you call it in or what fragment you call it in?
Now that's an interesting question, and I might I'll open up if the audience has stuff to add, then please do. I believe multiple fragments and activities can use the same view model, or they can each have their own. I think that depending on the architecture of the app, I like to do view model for each of my activities or fragments, and I like to keep them separate. And what binds the view model or where they're connected is I create the view model class, and then I create an instance of that class at the top of my fragment or activity that's using it. So this is how I get the view model into my class. I believe that the language would allow me to have multiple view models, as well as many fragments using the same one. I usually do a one-to-one with those. And the other thing you mentioned was factory. So I only create the view model in the onCreate one time. Factory is a singleton pattern, so there should only ever be one. And I always remember there was an old, this will give away my age group a bit, but there used to be a show on TV called Highlander, and there can only be one. So I think that it should really only get created once, and then it should persist through the life cycle of the app. Just like in our slide, it gives us a picture for how long they live. And they basically live through the life cycle, almost the whole thing. So they live until the on destroy is gone. That's when the on cleared method. So an activity, or we have an activities life cycle here, but an activity will get created, it'll get started, it can be resumed because it can be paused and stopped and destroyed and all of these things. When you rotate it, it goes through the whole cycle again. Whereas a view model, it gets created, so it's got its little create method, and it's just hanging out the whole time. So it goes through a lot fewer changes. But when the fragment that contains it, so when this fragment, game fragment, is destroyed, that's when the view model will then get destroyed. And it will be the view model that I created within the fragment itself. And if I'm completely wrong on that, someone can jump in and correct me, but I think that's how I believe it is. Does that make sense, Danielle? I hope.
Yeah, so that means probably then as long as that view model exists because of like some fragment that called it exists, then if you try another instance of that view model, you're going to get essentially the same state as the current
I
one.
think if I reinitialized it, it would wipe it away clean and recreate it. So I think it gets created when the fragment is created, and then it never gets recreated again. And the fragment goes through. Oh, go ahead.
If another fragment tries to create that view model, does it have the same state as the original fragment that had that view model? Like, do those view models, are they the same?
That's a really good question. They would be static. I don't think so. So that I'm unsure of. So I've never created a view model in the same view model in two fragments at the same time and tested that. So that's a really good question. To be honest on that one, I'm not sure how that would act. If that would be static and they'd use the same one or not. I'm kind of guessing no, but I'm unsure on that because that would make a difference as to whether you would use it. You could, whether you could use the same class for two fragments or. So I think if you wanted, you could pass the initialized view model in. And so if it were initialized, pass it to that other fragment somehow with it initialized. But normally the way I use is just a one-to-one. So that's why I'm not super familiar with that, because I don't generally pass them around, or I don't generally reuse the same one. I usually just create a one-to-one view model for each activity and fragment, and that keeps it simple for me.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Megan.
Yeah. So I'm relatively new to Android. Relatively, yeah. So like I did a Google Code Lab in the Google Basics for Android course, and they talked about a shared view model, and they had a code lab with a shared view model. I don't know if they implemented that design pattern because it's for people who are newbies, and it was trying to address a specific way of learning, right? Or if it's something that's more commonly used. So my question is just like, when would you use a separate view model for each activity or fragment? And when would you choose to use a shared view model?
That's a very good question. So I would say maybe share them if they have a lot of things in common. So just my knowledge of, and I think I see the code lab you're talking about. So we'll put, you can tell me if that's the code lab, the shared view model there. Shared view model across fragments. So you can share them, obviously. And let's see how to implement the recommended app architecture. So share between fragments of the same activity. So that's, I believe we're doing the same thing. So it looks like we could share that view model.
Yeah, I think this is it. It's talking about cupcakes.
Yeah, it's a
Definitely.
three-way. I have been through. I have the same confusion like Daniel. Like if we have a separate fragments, how we can do it. But like with the shared fragment, we can implement it like with the nav graph, and we have to make a separate nav graph and have to create a one single view model for all three fragments, or we can go with the initialize the view model on an activity level. So in the cupcake application, if I'm not wrong, I still have to refer it, but they have used the nav graph and they have used one view model across the whole application. But uh, yeah, I still have a little confusion. Like, if we are using factory, there are certain complications occurs. So, like, what is the main reason for using the factory pattern in the view model? I'm sure guys. I'm just curious.
A factory pattern in general is just to create objects. So it takes care of that initialization step. It kind of marries our classes to our code. What I'm finding as I search the web, I have been doing this for a while, trying to master this concept. And one thing I've learned about architecture is it really is customizable to the kind of app you're writing. And this is a conversation that people engage in a lot. So these questions are very hard to answer because there's a lot of times more than one right way and what's the best way for your app. And there might be different ways that work. So this is this is a master's level concept of these design patterns. I put a Stack Overflow link in there because that's making an attempt at answering some of the questions. So you can see the diverse, the people say Google recommends one for each one, but lots of people just use one shared, and then recommendations change. So it's not uncommon that these questions are really hard to answer, to be honest. And then remind me again, what was the second part of your question there? Oh, why would we use a factory?
Yeah, because if we use a normal view model, like I try myself, so its data is still the view model is working what it should work, and it's still like if we are adding a factory pattern in it, and we are making the view model factory. So yeah, what is the difference between two? Like what are the advantages of using it? So that was it. Yes.
Okay, so if you're talking about the custom, are you, I'll just to clarify, do you
No,
mean
no, no.
like the difference between using the
Uh,
built-in view model provider and then the custom one,
no,
or
no,
just
no.
provider in
General,
general?
general. So like so in the view model class, like we can make a separate class inside the view model class as a factory, and then we call it just like you just did. It's the same like that. Yes.
So the one that I did had an argument in it. So that argument was something I wanted to make my own custom constructor to receive that argument. So one reason you would make your own factory class is to pass an argument. And then we need the view model provider's utility to create the view models. So that's that view model providers class is the utility that's built into the SDK to create our view model classes for us. And so we have to use that whether we create our own custom factory is kind of our choice. I think that pretty much hinges on whether you need arguments or not. There might be other reasons
Mhm.
I'm unaware of. And then here's another Stack Overflow too, where they're talking about that, and they're telling us why you might use Viewmodel Factory. I think in a short answer would be because with Android you just have to. There's not another way to initialize a view model that I know of. And then if you need to get those arguments over, you likely need a custom factory. And they're really easy to make, as you saw.
I think there is one. Oh, sorry. I think there is one more answer. I think I just looked it up just to make sure. I think when you do request a view model from the view model provider or factory, I think it does recreate the same view model. So like when you rotate, yeah, because when you rotate the screen, it's technically destroying the fragment or activity and creating a new one. And so you wouldn't have the same data if it didn't have the same view model. So I think the point of the factory is to recreate the same one so you can be sure you have the same one every time. And so that's kind of how they also do sharing.
It would sure make more sense because factory is supposed to be a singleton. And so if it created a new one, that would violate singleton. So my knowledge of factories, that's generally a singleton. So the really good job, Danielle, you're hired. So, oh goodness. So, yeah. So really good job looking that up. So that would make more sense. I definitely feel that would make a lot more sense. And you guys are a great group. So any more questions, stump the speaker. I love it because I learn all the time. These are concepts that I go through each semester, and every time I do this, I learn more. So one thing cool about Android, if you get bored, they'll throw new tools at you, and then it's unlimited learning opportunities because there are so many ways to build an app, and many are elegant, some not so much. So 10 years ago, we were building a lot of our code in the same main activity, and that turns ugly pretty quick when you have to maintain an app like that. So any other questions on that, and how are you guys feeling? I think we've got a bit more time. Would you like to venture into live data?
So Jennifer, this was lovely, you talking about view model. Now I'm curious, since you have been teaching about MVVM architecture for a while. So when we started with Android, there was MVP. A lot of people used to follow the model view presenter paradigm, and now the modern way of doing stuff is model view view model. So what are your thoughts and insights? Like, why would you advocate MVVM as the modern way of doing things over MVP?
I honestly like MVP quite a bit. So I think MVP can be perfectly appropriate for just a smaller app. But I would go with MVVM simply because then you're using those more modern tools, and you're probably going to want to expand a project at some point. So I would use the MVVM just because there's a bit more layers to it and everything. But I don't think there's any problem starting with MVP, or if you have an app that's just inherently simple in nature, I don't think it would be really necessary to overcomplicate an app if you don't need the design pattern, and you can probably prune away pieces if you're never going to need them. But at the same time, you gotta keep the principles of software design in mind, that this is always going to grow more than you or it always has the potential to grow more than you think it does, because we had that issue with Y2K. We thought by year 2000 there'll be flying cars. So you might think you'll never expand on your architecture, but if your app is successful, or if you maintain that app for any length of time, you probably will. And I like Danielle's input there, that if MVP requires a reference to the view and MVV doesn't, that's a good answer too. So there's no circular reference. That would violate or kind of make our separations of concerns more coupled. So I think MVVM is just a more advanced solid pattern that kind of evolved from MVP. So I think you probably could write a good app for him with MVP, but can write a better one with MVVM.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then it's in my slide. It's my very last slide. There's a nice article. Let's see if I can find that. Let's see. There's a nice article that kind of goes through Android app architecture over time. If I can find that. It's on. I'll just have to go look at my slides if I can find those. I keep opening my web browsers and then losing them. this article right here has common design patterns for Android. I think they mention MVP in here as well. Yeah, so they talk about all sort, or those are just general design patterns. I'll get you guys a link for the Android architecture. There is an article on that site that will describe MVP and MVVM and what are the differences. So I'll stick a link on the slides before we're done too. And thank you. Good question, Sigard. Any other questions? And you guys have mental energy to look at some live data? I do if you guys do.
Yeah.
Great, great. You guys are great. So thank you for being my audience tonight. So in that case, let's see, I can use the project that I've already got, and we've already done all of this good stuff. There's some homework questions. There's some good ones in there. It's telling me my connection's unstable, so I hope I'm not breaking up. But let's look at live data, because one of my favorite patterns in computer science is the observable pattern, because it's just so neat. And now if you guys have seen the Jetpack Compose, which there's a lot of that going around, it sure is really neat when your UI updates off of your data. I love when the data is observed and it updates. So live data excited me very much when this first came out. So in this one, we're going to just expand on our app a bit. We're going to add an event when the user cycles through all the words and let them play again. So we'll just fix this app up a little bit, and we're going to use live data. I already have the starter code, so if you're continuing from the last code lab, you can just continue on from there. And so live data is an observable data holder. So it's like a regular one, only it's observable. So it will notify us when the data changes or the UI changes, and back and forth. It's life cycle aware, just like our view model was. And so what's really neat about live data is you don't have to worry so much about your life cycle management. Managing the life cycle of an Android app prior to these tools was a lot of work. So the fact that live data is life cycle aware is really, really helpful. And so let's get our app to do that. Under our game package, game view model, we're going to change these to be what's called a mutable live data object. And a mutable live data is one whose value can be changed. If you're working with a constant, you can just use live data. And notice all they've done is, instead of just using regular string, they've wrapped this with a mutable live data object, and then we're telling it the type of the data by using string. And then we also have one for integer. So we that in our game view model. Now, instead of these just being plain, they're now mutable live. Whoopsie, and then we'll get rid of extra tabs or extra browsers. There. Okay, and so to update the reference, we need to change the references. And one thing interesting that I noticed right away when I used live data is you have to use .value. So to get at the value that's in the live data, you have to use the .value there. So we can look for the on skip in game view model. On skip. Somewhere there's a structure view in Android Studio where you can click around in your methods too. So for on skip, I'm just going to replace it so that now it is subtracting 1 from my value using the minus operator. So another thing with live data, you can't just use addition and subtraction on them. You have to use .minus and .plus. C# and other languages have similar functions to this. So that's going to decrement our score by 1. And I suppose we're going to have to do the same thing on correct, only it's going to be plus. And I should probably follow the instructions, but I'm just taking a guess. Yep, so we did the same thing on plus. And then in next word, we also have to update next word to use the live data. So we'll do that. Great. And so in game fragments,
You have a typo in your on skip.
I
Well,
do.
incorrect.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're right. Thank you. You saved me a headache. Thank you so much. There. And isn't it cute how Kotlin lets us put functions inside of functions? And these modern languages are just so amazing. And Kotlin is probably my favorite one. I just love that you can do about anything with it. So great. And then we got our on skip. We need our next word. And so all we're doing here is just fixing, yeah, eagle eyes, right? And I'm needing better and better glasses every year. So this is just like updating our next word so that we're using our live data object instead. Or actually, we're not using live data, are we? What is that doing? Next word method, change the word reference to word.value. So all we really changed right there is that. And then in our game fragment, we'll do update word text. Once again, we're just getting the value in there. So we can look for update word and update score. Update. I'm going to get called a lot in here. There. So this just needs to have the dot value on there. This as well, because they are live data now. And when you have live data, you have to put dot value on there. And then we've got that done. Update the score text. I think I did that one. So then game finished. We can fix this little guy. He's just got, this is cool because it's using the Elvis operator there. So for my score, if there is no value in the score, then it's null, then it'll assign a 0. So that's our little Elvis operator null check. And this one is in game fragment. So we'll find that. I probably have an error message on that line that'll help take me to it. Let's see. Game fragment. I was looking for the end game. And we just need value. And then we need our Elvis operator 0. Great. So that has just updated it to use the live data. Somewhere I've got errors all over the place. I wish I didn't. Oh, might have missed a few places. Oh, now it's all cheered up. Okay, good. Nothing like a cranky compiler. And thank you, Megan. Okay, so make sure no errors, compile, run. And it would be good to check it at this point because if I made a mistake there and I didn't do some of the code, then it might not show me my changes or it might have broken my app instead of improved it. And I've got it a little bit upside down. I'll make it right side up. Whoops. I get ahead of my fingers sometimes. Let's see if it still works. Looks as though I've got a broken app. And so, what I will do is since we I won't spend a lot of time chasing an error, so we'll worry about that later. But let's talk about attaching the observers. So attaching the observers, the observer is going to pay attention for when the data changed. So when we attach an observer, we will attach it to the live data object that's in the view model. And it's going to give us a little place to put a method there. So in game fragment, in onCreateView, I'm going to add a little event to my observer there. And that's in my game fragment. We'll do that on onCreateView. I like to do these kind of together, so we'll put it right there. I'm getting a choice, so I'm going to pick the one with Android X on there, and it works just fine. So now I've got a place to put some code. Notice this is just a Lambda function for when it observes a change to my live data. I'll just put that line of code right in the body of my Lambda right here. And then we'll attach an observer to the word as well. Great. And so now when the value of score or word changes, it should update automatically. And now I can get rid of update word text and update score text. So let's do that. I just want to get rid of them everywhere. And if I implemented this right, which is possible I didn't, but we can get the finished code, I wouldn't need these anymore because the live data object should be observing those changes and updating the text in my UI automatically. So we can test it and see. If it doesn't work, I'll just move on and we'll look at the finished code in the end. Oh, and it crashed. So rather than chase errors, we'll just keep talking about the content. But what this does is it will observe the changes in the word, and it would update the text of my UI control when changes are made to that data. That's what live data is for and why it's very, very amazing. And so we can encapsulate the live data, which means putting it in a container. And let's encapsulate our live data by adding a backing property. So in our game view model, we can add a backing property. This will encapsulate it into our game view model class. Great. And so now it's live data. Okay, and so I've got that initialization error, and that's okay. That just means I need to add my little getter there. So now I've basically made a live data. This is no longer mutable, and a backing variable, which is mutable, and my getter will return the value of that backing data there. So now it's encapsulated within my class. And now I have to go through here and find everywhere I used regular score and put an underscore in front of it. And the errors can guide me through there. But I'm going to use my backing variable instead because it's got more or less, its access is somewhat restricted now because it's encapsulated. And all I've provided is a getter. So rename the word, and I have to do the same thing to word. So we'll do that. And then I need to find the one place I'm using this in my code and place an underscore. Nice. I like that link that was placed in the chat too. Thank you. That is good background. Whoops, I wasn't paying attention. There we go. So now all I've done is put those as some backing variables and just tighten down the encapsulation for this class. And so, yay, good job. I've encapsulated it. I'll pat myself on the back. And the last thing is we need a game finished event. So if you've not seen a nice diagram for the observer pattern before, Here's a nice diagram for it, where when there's an event that causes a state change, like a data update, it will fire that method in the observers. And the observers will only respond to what is currently live in the app. So they are lifecycle aware, and the observers will respond accordingly to the lifecycle. It's very, very cool. So now we'll use the live data and we'll detect that game finished event. So let's do that too. So we'll add this. This is a Boolean, and it's going to be true if my game is finished and false if it's not, I think. And we'll put this in our game view model again. Just add that right there. And then in game finished event, we'll set it to true. So, and I'm using the underscore, the backing variable there. And I want to, whoops, it's the end game method that I'm looking for. Where'd that little method get to? On game finish, excuse me. Must be in my fragment there. In game view model, add an on game finish. We'll do that. Great, so now I have this little method here. I'm probably gonna have to tell a method somewhere else in the program to call that. In game view model, inside the next word in the game if the list is empty. So we can do that. Look for next word. So we can tell if it's empty, else we want to end the game. So we'll just replace the body there. So otherwise, we'll if it's empty, we'll finish the game. Now I need an observer for that event or it won't do anything yet. So over in the game fragment, I need to add an observer. So this is like adding a listener to a button. It's just adding a listener to a live data object. And so this goes in my fragment where my other observers were. There, and that should observe, this is kind of clever because it's going to observe the state of that Boolean. And when it flips true or false, it can react accordingly. And I'm guessing I'm getting an error because I need to put underscores in front. Let's see. There we go. So game finished. I need to comment that code out. That's what it is. Oh, let me see what I'm doing here. The code you 200. Okay, so we've got, let's see, observer for the game finished event. We got that. Run your app, play the game. I can't run my app to see the problem, so we might have to take their word for it unless this fixes it. Let's see if I can run my app. Oh, I need a getter. So view model. I wonder if this next word even needs to be here. I have a feeling this might be code I was supposed to take out. How about we just not do that? So my app might be messed up. We'll see. But the long story short is if we could run this app and play the game, we could go through all the words and it should store the score automatically. But it's going to navigate automatically instead of staying in the game fragment. So after the word list is empty, it will call it. And because of that, Boolean will be changed from true to false. So it's going to navigate away from our game sooner than we want it to. So the code that we added has what's called a life cycle issue. So in game finished, we want to In the game fragment class, we want to get rid of that. There, so we need to get rid of the rest of this stuff in our game finished, because this is also navigating away. So let's take this out. Let's see if it'll let me run this, or it did let me run it. Let's see if it'll let me run it. Come back, emulator. There. And I've got a crash. So we'll take their word for it and we'll look at their app here. But game has just finished. So now rotate the device. The toast displays again. Rotate. You will probably see the toast every time. There. So basically what they've done by removing the code, not navigating away, is they've removed that life cycle issue. So you have to let the observer handle that and not the in-game method. So reset the finish game event. So they are, to finish the game, all they're doing is setting their Boolean value to false. That will trigger the observer, which will then do its thing, travel to the finished fragment or load the finished fragment in the navigation and display it. So on game finish complete. So then they can run the app, go through all the words, change the screen orientation, the total's only displayed once, and so forth. Great. So what I'd like to do is go get their finished code, because I think we're just about there. Yeah. So let's go get their finished code and play with it. After we see, let's just take a quick look at this step. So now they're going to add live data to the score. So they're making a score with a getter, setting that up in the init of the score view model again. And now they're observing the score as well. So whenever the score is changed, it will update the text. And this might be the piece I need for my score to display correctly. And then we're going to add the play again button. So they add that onto their layout. They have their mutable live data as with a backing property. And then they're setting this value to true and false. So whether or not that value is true or false will dictate whether or not it travels to the final score fragment. And so let's see if all of this works. I'm going to grab this project and we can look at the code from there. Guess the word live data. So I'm going to I have that project. I'm going to open it. Oh, and I might have to follow their link because those might be just the starter projects. Yeah, if you guys would like, feel free to ask about live data as well. The important thing to know about live data is that observer pattern, knowing that it's going to call that observer automatically in a life cycle sensitive fashion when changes to those live data fields are made. So that is the reason for live data and how it works. And you just need to add a listener on those observables. I'm sorry, I lost my web browser. There we go. Solution code. This is the live data. Guess the word. These are the finished apps. So we'll download these. Guess the word starter. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's still the same one. Now I just deleted my project. So don't you love coding and talking at the same time? So easy to do things like that. Okay. Hopefully there's a guess the word in here, so that live data, so that we can look at just the code part and see if it works. We'll check it out. Guess the word live data. Great. So now I can open that up. Downloads. Great. And so I think that while that's loading, let's look at the key points of live data as well. So because I kind of ran through the back there, or ran through the end of the tutorial there, let's look at the summary for live data while that app is loading. So it's an observable data holder class. I love the lifecycle awareness. You use it to enable your UI to update automatically. So that is just so cool. It saves a lot of boilerplate code. It saves a lot of lifecycle maintenance that you would otherwise have to do. To add the live data, that's the important part, is you have to change the variables in your view model to be live data or mutable live data. And thank you, Danielle. Have a good night. And then to encapsulate it, you can use those getters and a backing property like they showed, and the observable live data. So you can observe that data in your activity or fragment to catch the changes. And of course, there's many more layers that we can add to the architecture beyond these. So if you travel back to the original link, there's 2 more code labs after this one that'll take you even deeper into the concepts. But those are 2 of your key starting concepts to work with. And let's see if my app loaded. It might have. I do not want to update my project right now. And I guess it's still loading. It's almost there. It's installing. So we'll give it just a second. I do like my computer. It works pretty good. Okay, so it is performing as it did before. And when I hit end game, it navigated. If I hit back, it can go back. It plays again. Now it crashes. So I may have tested it a little rough. But if we look at this, we can let's look at one of our files that has the data in there, which would be the game fragment. You can see we've got our observers that are observing. And then our view model, we've got our live data objects that can be observed. And then we're using those throughout our code with the backing variable and so forth. So that concludes the first 2 code labs of Android architecture. I hope some of that was helpful, and I will turn it over to the audience for questions. And, and thank you very much for letting me present. And here, I'll stop my share too. Great. So any questions or anything else that you'd like to discuss tonight, or we could have a discussion group. We could have a pop quiz.
Just out of curiosity, this observable pattern is a part of reactive Android, right? RX Android or RX Java? Kotlin, sorry.
Well, observer pattern you're going to find in all sorts of places. It is part of the Jetpack or the Android X libraries, I believe, because it comes along with the live data objects. So they come with the ability to have the observer pattern. And so what they would have in there is some methods that you can then observe or add. They're very much like the click method. So they have some delegate methods in there that you can add a listener to. And that's basically what the live data objects are, and they're built in. You'll see the observer pattern throughout software design. I believe Jetpack Compose would be based on it, if I understand it, because it does some of this automatically. So what's really cool is after you do this code lab tutorial, once you've covered architecture, then start exploring Jetpack Compose, and it'll make a million times more sense, because that's where we're going with this ultimately. And it sure would be a lot easier to learn Compose if you had some understanding of architecture and live data and those sorts of things under your belt. So I think the observable pattern is something you'll see in a lot of frameworks. And that's a very good question.
Thank you.
And not to forget that we will also be doing Jetpack as part of this modern Android study jam series. So stay tuned for that.
Wonderful. Yes. And I would recommend these code labs as a precursor, because it'll help you understand what might be under the hood of Jetpack Compose. And then you'll have an appreciation for how Jetpack Compose can simplify your apps, and also the state that comes into play when you're using Jetpack Compose. You'll understand why that's there, and it'll help you to understand how to maintain the state, because that's the tricky part with the reactive frameworks. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Cigar. And then I can entertain all night, but I could also pick on the crowd. So would you guys like to have a group discussion or anything?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer, for agreeing for hosting tonight's session. And just a reminder for all the attendees that we have a Slack group, bostonandroidslack.com. Let me post that in chat. And I always believe that learning is a continuous process. So feel free to ping Jennifer, me, or Kevin over here with any sort of questions. Maybe you're working on some sort of freelancing Android project, or maybe you were just curious about some GitHub project and everything, and we would be happy to help you.
Great. Yeah. And so I am just putting my last little details in the chat. And I'm jen.code, so don't hesitate to reach out to me anytime. I'm a career learner, so I do learning for a living. if you like to explore questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Great, and there's our Slack channel. Wonderful.
I was about to ask the same thing. Yes, the Slack channel or maybe. Yeah. Thank you.
Alrighty. So I guess we can wrap up for tonight.
Sure, and I just thought of something. I had those slides. So in conclusion, I'll show you the slides. There's some resources on there. So I already showed you one, which is the article, but let's see the other one. There's a book about Android architecture from raywinderlich.com. That is a fun book that'll go through layer by layer. They also have a video course if you subscribe. There we go. So there is my slides. And the last slide on here has some links to that sort of thing. So we've got, and also I gave you the link to the Google, but that's to the Google's architecture guide. That's in the code lab. But here is an affordable book about Android architecture, and it builds a whole app.
Share?
Yeah, I put it in the chat. So if you would like to see it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's one of the only books that I know of. There might be others out there, but that one's really good. If you ever subscribe to their site, they have a video course about it. And then if you want to go the free route, they have an article about it. Android architecture. I thought that's what I put in my slides. Let's see. Article, Ray Winderlich. And they talk about MVP and MVVM and all this stuff. Here's one about MVP, but you can also search their site because we're adding new articles all the time. But they have many sites about Android architecture patterns. The articles are free, so I would start there. And then if you're interested to learn more, there's a book. There's all these wonderful Google resources. I would recommend Code Labs more than anything else. And if you want more, those books and articles are really helpful.
I have one thing. I think somebody has to approve the email address for the Slack channel,
Oh,
because when I'm trying to reach the channel, it's showing me like my email address is don't have account on this workspace. That's what it's showing me. So is there any form that I have to fill out or something?
No, I think it should work. I mean, does it ask you Google ID?
Yeah, like in the Slack I made with my Google ID, yes, I'm trying to log in, but it is showing me that error message that my ID don't have an account on this workspace. So like somebody might need to add me like particular email ID
Uh,
for the permissions.
no, no, I don't think that works that way because it's pretty much an open Slack group.
Let
Uh,
me try a different way.
and here's my LinkedIn ID. You can reach out to me after the session as well, and we can figure out like if you are facing any problems for joining the Slack group.
Okay. No, it's not working.
Okay. Yeah, you can add me if I'm assuming that you're on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and later we'll definitely figure out what's wrong with your access privileges. I need to take a look because I've never heard like someone facing any access problems. So yeah, we'll definitely look into it and figure out something.
Okay, no worries. I will definitely reach out to you. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harsh.
and Sagar, I want to thank you so much for putting on the series and hosting me tonight. And thank you, Boston and everywhere. Thank you all for being here. It's really
It
nice
was our pleasure
to
hosting you, Jennifer.
I really appreciate it. So it was great to be here, and stay warm in Boston.
Yeah, I need that. Alrighty. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Kevin. We'll see you
Thank you.
guys
Have a good
around.
night.